All right, I would like to start the meeting. This is the planning commission's regular meeting Wednesday, using. I'd like to start the meeting. This is the planning commission regular meeting Wednesday, June 19th, 2024. Roll call.
Buck,
Here.
Detmer. Here. McSween.
Here.
Moss.
Here.
Paul.
Here.
Robson.
Present.
Wilmot.
Here. Okay. Approval of minutes. There we have two different, so let's take the first one, the April 6th, 2024. The joint city council and planning commission minutes. It's a one page. I take off.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the minutes from the April 6, 2024 joint meeting with City Council and the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Second.
Ted makes the motion to approve. Charlie seconds. Any changes or discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Minutes are approved. The second minutes. There were some real simple typos that I'd like to fix, but they don't change the meaning of anything. For instance, there's they that should be there. THERE. Forceability should be enforceability. So it's, you know, a window sign to their home. It's residence instead of residence. So simple stuff. So I'd like to, you know, work with Christine and get those corrected without having to correct them officially. And I have one more thing, and then Albert, you can go.
Yeah, it's just another minor correction, but I think it's on page 2 at the top of the minutes. I think the wording that she used was keep on speaking contiguous instead of continuous. So second line, just before the word with in the PNP building.
Okay, what paragraph are you looking at? What are we on page 2?
Page 2, very top, second line,
Okay, is to keep landscaping. Oh,
she used the word contiguous. So
okay.
Was it contiguous or consistent or I
no, it was contiguous is what she was saying. You know, it's they wanted to because they had shared parking.
Okay, and then on page 5, third paragraph. I say something that it's how I said it, but it didn't really, the meaning didn't come through. So I'd just like to adjust that to say, Chairperson Robson responded that if you change the total maximum number of signs, you would have to adjust the total square footage of the signs. Do anybody objection to that?
change the total?
Well,
If you change the total,
if you change the total maximum number of signs allowed, or a number of sign allowances. Number of the signs allowance, you would have to adjust the total square footage allowed. Oh, and then, does that make sense? It made more sense to me than what was there. I mean, that made sense in the discussion, but it was like, got to clarify what we were talking about.
Total allowed.
Yes, thank you. Okay, and then the next paragraph was Commissioner Paul stated that most people follow a pattern and that signs could be alternating. I would suggest we add of commuting. Because that's what you were talking about,
pattern of
commuting. You're talking about how people go to
Right,
school and go
right,
here and there, so
right.
just to simplify it. And then one. Okay, 2 paragraphs after that, it says Chair Robson commented that you cannot read the signs to determine the type. I'd like to just delete, they can regulate commercial signs, not commercial. That really wasn't relevant to that conversation. So those are ones that actually changed the, but the other ones are just typos. Or auto correct mistakes. All right. Anything else? Take a motion to approve.
So I'll make a motion to approve the June 5, 2024 minutes of the planning commission with the content changes noted and with the chair making a few grammatical corrections.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, Ted makes the motion to approve with changes and Carolyn seconds. All in favor? Aye. Minutes are approved. All right. Now we need to amend the agenda. So number 3A, new business introduction of proposed sign ordinance. Oh, no, we don't. Never mind. Let's take care of this now, though. Number 4, old business A, discussion on June 5th, 2024, special planning commission meeting and how to move forward on the temporary sign issue was something I had requested, but I had requested it for the sign committee meeting, not this meeting. So I would like to remove this from the agenda. And I think I need a motion to do that.
Should we be asking the whole commission for direction? In terms of,
Well, I think the sign committee needs to meet and do this. To figure things out, and then we'll come back to the planning commission. But I don't want to do that tonight.
Do you want to keep it on and just give a very brief overview of where you're at with the material you got?
It's not any different than it was at the last at that special meeting. So I would rather.
Okay.
Take this, it wasn't supposed to be on this agenda, it was supposed to be on the sign committee agenda. We will have this on the agenda going forward, it's just not tonight, we have enough to do and we have a limited time, so I'd like to have this deleted. So I need a motion to do that.
Okay, I'll make a motion to amend the agenda and remove item 4A, discussion on the June 5th, 2024 special planning commission meeting and how to move forward on the temporary sign issue.
Okay, I need a second.
Second.
Okay, Ted makes the motion. Matt seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Is anybody opposed? Okay. All right, moving on to new business. 3A, introduction of proposed sign ordinance amendment murals. John?
I can take that, Madam Chair. This is mainly a housekeeping issue. As you are aware, the city council established and appointed an arts commission. And in the current zoning or in the current sign ordinance, there is a provision in section 6.1 permitted signs murals that says murals are subject to staff review. And no murals are permitted on any structure that faces a street or a park, and murals shall be maintained at all times in a safe condition and kept in good repair. The proposal is to remove that section out of the sign ordinance and then add the following under the general provisions to all districts: that the murals will be considered public art and shall not be construed as a permanent or temporary sign. The location, size, and content of the mural will be reviewed and approved by the city's art commission based on public art guidelines prepared by the art commission and approved by the city council. So murals are considered public art, not signage. So the arts commission is starting their process, and we want to move that into their purview to let them handle what guidelines they're going to come up with for murals, which then have to be approved by city council. So it's kind of I know that the sign ordinance is being reviewed, but this is something that we can take care of fairly quickly and get it over to the Arts Commission so they can start their process.
So will their commission, will they have an ordinance for murals?
The discussion is they'll have guidelines relative to public art, both murals, sculptures, any form of public art will be in their guidelines that they're going to prepare. I mean, I don't know what those are yet. But typically the art guidelines are eventually approved by the mayor and city council as part of that overall process. So they're just kind of getting started, but murals is something that we need to shift over to their responsibility outside of the sign ordinance. And really, the sign ordinance, there's really no specifications in the sign ordinance for murals. It says it's gonna be staff reviewed. And it just can't be placed where it faces a park. But I guess it was, the provision was applicable at the time, but now that we have our Arts Commission, they should be responsible for murals. Shouldn't have it in the sign code. So if the planning commission is okay with this, our recommendation is to schedule a public hearing for the July 17th meeting so we can have a public hearing and then eventually move it on to city council.
I sent you
I'll let that-
a memo
Yeah.
on what the, oh, this, by the way, is the Michigan Sign Guidebook, which is my new Bible. So it was pretty strong language that the murals should be, art should be part. I don't want the responsibility, and I would love for this art commission to, but I'm wondering if it's appropriate to move it out, because in this one in Norfolk, Virginia, that sign ordinance was null and void because they exempted murals. And if you read our sign definition, it's definitely decoration on a building.
Mhm.
That's a mural. So I don't quite know. First off, I'm a little concerned about if it's not in the ordinance, it's a separate commission. How you make sure that something is in good repair, do you have any teeth? If it's a commission.
Yeah, and that would be the responsibility of the commission as part of their approval of a mural would be to have an agreement. A lot of public art commissions have agreements with the owners that have murals on their buildings that they have to be maintained and they have certain requirements. But you really need to get the murals outside of the sign ordinance.
Okay,
I mean,
well, it is a little confusing because
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like they're recommending that. So I don't want to, I want to get it right as much as
we're
possible.
gonna get it right, but
Okay.
get the murals out of the sign code.
Okay,
Okay, let's make them public art under the purview responsibility of the Arts Commission and the City Council.
okay.
So that's the, like I said, it's a very specific amendment to the sign code. But that's the purpose of it, is to shift the responsibility over to the Arts Commission.
Okay.
John or city staff, are there restrictions on a mural so that are all murals in the city limits going to be then reviewed by, approved by the new art commission?
Usually that's how they are. They're reviewed and approved by the Arts Commission.
Does that mean that's still kind of a work in process in terms of how that's going to
Yeah,
be?
because they haven't really started working on their guidelines yet.
Is this somewhat premature that we are kind of could we potentially be creating a kind of a gap in terms of who's responsible?
I think
for
that's
this?
a good question, but I don't think so, because I would not want, personally, professionally, I would not want the planning commission involved in making a decision on murals. Because it's really not, there's really no standards for their evaluation in the sign ordinance, except that they cannot face a public street or a public park. Which in a way, kind of doesn't make sense to me anyway, because if you see murals in downtowns, they face a public street. I mean, that's why they're public art. So there's some conflicting language already in this 2-sentence section that could cause some problems. But it's really not up to the planning commission to take a look at public art. It's really, in this case, and I think it's a positive that the city council actually created an arts commission, because a lot of communities are starting to really promote public art in their open spaces in their downtowns. So you really need to have somebody that can manage that process and that overview. So.
They'll have to be very careful with the language Because I imagine they still will have to meet the content neutral standard. And I don't know how you do that with art. Well, art is based on what's in front of you.
Well, I think the intent of the art committee is to, put out requests for art and they have to follow a certain criteria to be even submitted
Mhm.
for review.
Yeah, I
think
just,
that'll-
I was just involved with a project down in the city of Trenton where the Downtown Development Authority they've commissioned $200,000 in public murals in their downtown. And they've gone through a pretty robust process to review not only the artists, but the artwork that's being proposed. And it's gone through a series of reviews by different agencies. So, and we all know that Grand Rapids has a pretty robust public art program too. But, this is something that I'd like to pass it over to the Arts Commission so they can get going on their guidelines and then that we don't have to be involved in determining what's public art or what's appropriate. Let the Arts Commission do it.
And you'll be working with them to create the guidelines?
In and around a way, I think what I would prefer to do is actually let them kind of come up with the guidelines in a draft, and I think I'd like to take a look at them at that point in time and possibly even share them with the planning commission, get your feedback on them. But, that's just part of the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ted?
I have two comments or questions. The first one is, do we have just an adequate we're removing a section on murals in the existing section and we're adding a new section which says what you presented. Do we have an adequate definition, just so we're all clear exactly what we're talking about in the sign ordinance for murals is my question.
I think it was.
The definition is,
Yeah.
the definition is 2.1.6. I think, and 2.142. In the code.
Which is,
Well, here it is. Mural, it's page 6 of the sign ordinance. A work of decorative art applied on or attached to an exterior wall within public view that does not include graphics or text that can be interpreted as containing commercial advertising or other content intended for commercial purposes. This definition wouldn't pass muster for what we have to go for because it's not content neutral, but that's what we have currently. And I'm wondering if we should. I don't know how we do this. I don't know if we make an exemption in the sign ordinance about public artwork and murals. Because one of the things that the guidebook said that if you make an exemption, you have to explain while you're doing it and justify it.
Well, the exemption is in the provisions that I have under proposed Article 3, Section 3.1. Murals shall be considered public art and shall not be construed as a permanent or temporary sign.
Okay, so I think the other question is, do we keep a definition for mural in here? It can't be this one
It can't be that one, no.
because it's kind of, but maybe it's just similar to, it's part of the public art,
Yes,
considered part of public art.
correct.
my other comment then, after listening to Commissioner Buck, I have to agree. Things take time to get done in the city, normally with commissions. We have no idea when they're going to get done with their process of setting up guidelines with that. When I read the existing definition, I know there's obviously issues with our current sign ordinance, but that realized and being said, our current mural definition, no murals are permitted on any structure that faces a public street or park or public park. And your comment was, why would you do that if you wanted art? They clearly didn't want that before. It's pretty clear. They didn't want murals in the public realm from the current ordinance.
But,
Now, we've had,
conceptually, that makes no sense to me.
But
Because that's the whole purpose of public art, so the public can see it.
I don't know what their intent was to where they wanted it, but they didn't want it there. Now, there's been a change in the city to have a process to allow public art, and a commission is formed in getting together their rules. But in the interim, we don't seem to allow murals in the public realm. So if we remove this soon before they get done, there will be a period where in the public realm. They're not prohibited. And there's not rules for how to do them, and that bothers me.
Well, if we take it out of the sign ordinance. It's not in the zoning ordinance, and if something is not in the zoning ordinance, it's not allowed. Is that a proper interpretation? So I don't think we have to worry about somebody going forward. Because there'd be no mechanism for it to do it. It's if we. And I also think that this is kind of like the official. Directive to, okay, our commission, you're taking this over, it's official, get to work.
Well, they can get to work, and when they have a product that they're getting close to, we can work together, I think, I would think. This isn't hard for us to pass or set up it's pretty straightforward. I was prepared to do it tonight, but a good point was brought up and.
Well, the issue is under the proposed section 12. It says that they're not going to be construed as permanent or temporary signs. It says the location, size, and content shall be reviewed and approved by the city art commission.
Right.
So if we approve this as proposed and somebody comes in and wants to put a mural, they're still going to have it reviewed by the art commission, and it's going to be based on their guidelines. So at that point in time, the arts commission would say, we're not approving it because we haven't approved the guidelines yet. So I kind of think we're making it more bureaucratic than what we should be making it, personally.
Matt,
Yeah, have they started working on the guidelines?
I don't know, last time I had talked to the mayor, he said they were getting up and running right now.
We just agreed to have a public hearing on the ordinance change, so that's July 17th. So that's a month. I have no issues with the change right now.
Again, as I read this, and that was, appreciate the city planner's perspective on that. It does seem to feel that there isn't really a hole that they have to prove it. And just again, as I look at this language, maybe for the chair, the location, size, and content of the mural shall be reviewed and approved by the city's art commission. So I thought, well, signs have to be content neutral. Do murals or not? Because we have the word content right in the thing we're gonna be asked
yeah,
about.
that's.
You feel like the sign guideline, guidebook defines a mural as a sign,
They say it gets swept into signs,
and signs have to be content neutral.
correct? You're having with public, I'd be good to, I will look at. Other ordinances, see what Grand Rapids did, because they've been a shaker and a mover in Arbor has too. So I'll see what they say. But Ted is right that we probably can't. For it to be in the sign ordinance, it shouldn't say content. The size, the location, what were the? So what the elements that may be regulated is number per property, height and size dimensions, illumination and maintenance standards, setbacks and placement. So that's what's allowed to be regulated through the sign.
If it's a sign, yes.
So with all due respect to the manual, I think, is the Mona Lisa a sign? I mean, I don't think so. It's art. And is a mural a sign? Well, it could be if you paint a lot of words on it. But if you paint a picture like exists as you look from the back lot over on the existing wall off of State Street there, Michigan, sorry, that's not, I mean, it's content because you can kind of recognize some of the areas of town that are reflected in it, but it's content in a different way. I think if we get into words and messages, that's content that would be a problem underneath the sign ordinance. But I don't think that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about putting political messages on murals.
Correct.
So, and there are some ideal locations in our town where it would be an enhancement, and we do have precedents for murals in town as well. So, and I think they're an enhancement to the town.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly.
So I
just
don't
wanted
have
to
any
be-
problem moving this forward to a public hearing, because we're not committing to it at this time. And if folks have concerns about it between now and next month, they can research them a little bit more and bring those concerns back at that time.
I would recommend changing the word content to concept, location, size, and concept of a mural.
I would just, to me, like conceptually, I have, in terms of the direction that the city council would like to go with the art commission and murals, I don't, I'm in favor of that. I'm just worried about a unregulated gap of time between the two. And I'm not really clear that there's even an art commission that's established with members, let alone a time frame in terms of what that ordinance gonna look like.
Yeah, my understanding is there is an art commission that the council has appointed members.
And so 30 days from now, will we have an understanding of what their guidelines are gonna be in terms of, we won't,
I
right?
doubt it.
Yeah,
It takes a
and
while to
so-
develop the guidelines.
you know, I'm a little uncomfortable with just this gap in between.
Well, the one thing I don't want to happen is I don't want the art commission guidelines then to be scrutinized by the planning commission and have the planning commission say, well, we're not really gonna make the changes to the ordinance because we're not comfortable with your guidelines. So I don't want to get in a situation where we got two commissions pitted again, because people that deal in the arts and the public art have a different perspective than typically what a planning commission does, who's mainly regulatory in process. So I just don't wanna,
I agree with that, John. Wouldn't the Arts Commission make, I would assume the presentation wouldn't be to us, it would be to the city council
the city council would have to make the opinion.
for the ordinance that they want to pass.
Yes.
Well, it's
So we wouldn't, or
commission,
for the guidelines they want to pass, I assume they would show them to city council. I don't,
yes.
Yes, they'd have to.
so we're really not in that loop necessarily. We even maybe want to be,
You don't want to be.
right?
And what I did when I was getting at Commissioner Paul was kind of using the change in the sign ordinance when the guidelines are actually drafted. If the planning commission procedurally, or maybe the planning commission has an opinion, they don't like some of the guidelines, that they may somehow recraft the provisions in the sign ordinance. You know, you don't want to, it's either all, or I mean, give them the responsibility and let them work it out. That's the thrust of this is, well, do we have any, we don't have many murals in town, and I can't think of, since I've been working with the city as a consultant. Yeah, but I haven't had any, hasn't been any requests for any.
We can't pass ordinances though, right? We're an advisory board.
Yes.
Right? So it's not as if there were in the art commission, there was something that we found as a body objective to, we'd only be advising with our opinion, which it seems like that would be the role of the planning commission to do so. We can't obstruct, their recommendations or the final approval from the city council.
I think commissions are pretty independent. So the Parks Commission has. They make their own decisions. Sometimes I would like it when it's something that's being built that it come to us. But you know, the tradition is each commission, we're a commission. So each commission is independent. So I'm very comfortable passing this on and, oh, Rich, you want to say something?
I just, I'm not concerned about the gap. I don't see anybody trying to sneak something through, without it being noticed. I don't see that happening. And let's let the art commission come up with the regulations. Why stand in the way of that?
Albert?
Do I understand it right? If we do what's proposed here on the memo, that the murals will no longer be our responsibility. And if that's fine, as long as there's somebody else's responsibility, I don't have a problem with us. I don't. And the mural has to be concept, issues that a correct word. It has to be concept by people with art experience, etc. I have a daughter who teaches art. But so I don't have a problem with this either. I just think what we do, it's either ours or it's theirs. It can't be both of ours. And so we have the language crafted such that what I would hear is we're moving this out from under us. And we're putting it under the art commission. And I think what we have to do is that goes forward. If the art commission decides that what they're doing will impact the planning commission, then there needs to be a discussion and say, well, we have to bring another resolution forward because, something in 16.2.58 conflicts with this. So I don't have a problem with it moving forward either.
All right, I'd like to get on to our next topic, so could we go ahead and, Ted?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion to schedule a public hearing, which I will make a motion to do that on the amendment for the public hearing will be for. Our July 17th meeting, the public hearing will be on this discussion of potentially altering our sign ordinance as per our memo to remove murals from that and putting that approval into the city's art commission. So that will be my motion, and my comment is that gives us another month to get more information, discuss it, get public comment. And then we can decide at that point. Oh, yes. Do we agree, John, that the correction to the agenda memo, if you will, this drafted ordinance should change the word content to concept?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll make the motion to change that word to concept from content.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, Ted makes the motion. Carolyn seconds it, roll call.
Robson,
Yes.
Wilmot,
Yes.
Buck,
No.
Detmer,
Yes.
McSweeney,
Yes.
Meridian,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Could I just make a request that
Yeah.
at the next meeting, when we have the special hearing, that we ask for an update on the sign committee status at that time as a part of our consideration during the hearing?
Do you mean an update from the art commission?
Yes.
Art commission.
Okay. Did I misspeak?
You said
Yeah,
Signs on frame.
I was a little confused. All right, moving on to for old business. We need to continue discussion on some of this stuff to you. Surveys and window. And that over to that.
So how do we do? This is a no action discussion. So the purpose was for you guys, you folks to go out into the neighborhood and take a look at the context and the character of the various residential neighborhoods as part of the kind of the prelude to the zoning rewrite. So Madam Chair, you got some hands up?
Albert?
Yeah, my first question was all the elements and how important they are. I was wandering around and emailed Lisa and said, Lisa, where is the setback for the front? Is it from the middle of the street, the curb? Well, no, it's from the property line. Well, you can't see the property line. You have no, I mean, if you look on GIS, then, you know, I said, okay, I'll pull the GIS up and they have a measurement tape on there. So I checked that with them. Lisa said, no, that's off, what, 6 to 8 feet? And did you tell me what's what one of the Emmett County estimate? So, I mean, why would we collect that data? The setback, other than if we want, generally on Michigan Street, most houses are in line except for 2 or all of them, or, I mean, some of this data, as somebody walking around, we can't collect. You understand the question?
Yeah.
So that would, and same with lot coverage, it can be done, I've done it, I went through 48 properties and pulled up their, Emmett County, the
BSNA.
BSNA, and you can pull up the frontage, you can pull up how many square feet the foundation is and the garages, and I did the work of adding those all up and figuring out lot. But what are we gonna do with it? We want that detail. I mean, I'm always accused of somebody doing the forest from, tell the forest from the trees, and I don't wanna spend too much time in the trees on things we don't need. I can see things like driveway curb cuts, and one fact that's not on there is alley access. As you go up Michigan State, oh, they don't have a driveway, maybe they don't have a garage. But if you go down the alley, they do have some garages, they do have some curb cuts. Which would be important when you start looking at, are we gonna allow increased density in this area because of parking or whatever? So I mean, those things are important, but I mean, I'm happy to, I can go down a rabbit hole into a spreadsheet for hours. My wife loves it because she can read and I'd be quiet. But you know, and so I can do that kind of thing, but I just wondered, where are we on priorities with these, all these elements down at the bottom?
Okay. Anybody else have some comments?
Yeah, I was frankly just overwhelmed. I mean, there's such a variety. I mean, there's just so little consistency. And at least in this panel one, I basically focused on that. I mean, there were different front setbacks. I mean, some properties were practically touching each other. You know, some had alleys, some didn't. I mean, the amount of building on a property varied tremendously. I mean, and it was pretty dense for the most part. I didn't see a lot of place where more living space could be had, as it was, you know, other than some of the large homes. Yeah, I didn't know where to even begin, and there were various heights. There's just so little consistency. It's hard to document.
Okay, I already have everybody comment. So Matt,
Yeah, I agree with Rich. I just think we have neighborhoods within the city that have distinct characteristics, features. But I think as time has gone on, those neighborhoods have changed. And you see a mix of detached garage, attached garage, homes that have had additions put on. There's really, you know, I was driving around looking at all the different neighborhoods. There's a lot of different types of homes in every single neighborhood. It is just, yeah, it's challenging to find, you know, unique details about each neighborhood.
Carol?
I also felt overwhelmed, so I made it through panel one. And it takes time, and for me, you know, in doing, you know, building design, it's easy for me to see things and see context, similarities in neighborhoods. So I did not focus on any of the commercial. I thought our main focus was to be on the residential, so I just targeted those areas in this zone one. And I made this list of different things and I marked each house on each side of the street, what had it, what didn't. And some of the things that stood out or the most common were I noted 70 of them have entry facing the main entry door faces the street. 73 of them have either an enclosed front porch or an open covered front porch. So there are certain driving factors, architectural features that also then tend to lean towards the architectural period when they were built, which Ted has a drawing that he did that sort of outlines based on the time period of when the houses were built. And in this panel that we looked at, you could see that there were some, it must have been maybe bigger lots at one time that had a big house, and then they sold part of their lot, split it, and then they built a smaller one-story house or a kit house that was probably built in the 60s or 70s. And there are a few of those sprinkled into this neighborhood, but not many. And then we, in this, in the residential, I think I counted 3 apartments, houses, so houses that have been converted, either boarding houses. And I think they're also historic boarding houses. And then there are 2 residential apartment buildings in all of these neighborhoods. In the residential apartment building on the corner of Bay Street and William Street seemed to be the tallest one because it has a basement level walkout because it's on a hillside. So it looks like it's 2.5. As far as heights of buildings, I would say that they're all 2 stories and some of them have a steeper attic gable roof. So it could be, we could say 2.5 stories. I would say the average house height is maybe 25 to 30 feet. And there's a few single story. There are quite a few detached garages in the rear yards of these houses. But yeah, 73 had asphalt roofs, 13 had asbestos siding, 30 had horizontal wood siding, 12 had wood shingle siding or other wood shingle like shake details. I counted 21 that had horizontal vinyl siding, 8 that were brick and stucco. There's all kinds of good stuff. So for me, you know, this neighborhood is very dense and I don't see how we could improve the density unless we allowed for, you know, the meeting middle, is that what it was?
Missing middle.
Missing middle, unless we started looking at stuff like that. And which we talked about before is letting the house convert to a duplex. But some of the features that I noticed in these neighborhoods specifically are how many of the front entries are actually facing the street. And that seems to be a common feature in these neighborhoods. So.
Okay.
So, yeah, but I only got through one panel, you guys, sorry. So I need more time.
But I just want to make a correction to what I said. It is easy to find the characteristics of the homes in the neighborhood, but over time, you can see it, but it has changed. In a lot of these neighborhoods, the types of homes that are around, what's being built now. You know, the homes have changed over time.
And I would agree with that. And even the houses that have been renovated, they're still in keeping with the style of the homes in their neighborhood. For instance, I only noted one flat roof.
Thank you. A observation. And then to people's comments about, you can really kind of tell when the period of time when something was built in panel 3. It was really kind of interesting as you start to get closer to the high school and to the south side of panel 3. There's really a kind of a mid-century feel in that, in those neighborhoods versus the rest of what's in that, what's in that panel. And often panel 3, I think it's probably the way to describe that time period, but 50s, 60s, I'm guessing. And no curb cuts, no, in that little section, and then quite a few garages, but 1-car garages, and typically smaller garages where they almost didn't seem practical for modern vehicles. And so just to everyone's else's, just to confirm what everyone else see is that even in some of our R2 districts, there are kind of some unique characteristics in there. The other just general comment, as I'm doing this and overwhelmed like everyone else, I'm thinking about setbacks and heights, and just it seems like with me walking through it, which I actually am glad I did the exercise, but I still kind of feel like it's so overwhelming that I'm kind of making subjective calls on data that's not subjective. Like the setback is a defined distance, and me walking down the street and kind of saying, hey, characteristically it feels like it's 20. I don't know. And so that was my other kind of challenge with this exercise. But in general, I'm really glad I did it, and I have a better appreciation for the areas.
Okay, well, I'll go next since Charlie wants to be last. Oh, Ted, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I tried to see how exhaustive I could do, and it just was working on the first panel, and it was a bit too much. And then I did cheat and talk with the chair and got some ideas. So I did more of an overview, and I ended up with this map of the city. I took a old word map, and what I found from my perspective was I found 4 types of neighborhoods, but really 3 types of housing. There was kind of a lot of first word where I live, Lake Street, some what I would call old historic homes. These were homes, a lot of them tend to have a fairly decent size lot. They have more extensive architectural features, kind of that Victorian look. So there was several neighborhoods of that back in the first word. And then there's a lot of neighborhoods of what I call old turn of the century construction, but they were more common homes. They weren't quite as ornate. Those are the streets we go on, and they tend to have much more density. It's interesting with any of these categories, the setbacks on a street or block can, usually on a street similar, but it can change with the same housing type. So I had those old historic homes, these more grand homes, a little more fancy, bigger lots, more compact. I don't know if it would call it simpler homes, more working class homes, but they're old. They're turn of the century, early 1900s. And then this mid-century for sure. For me, it was the blue area. It's all this 1950s, 1960s single one-story structures. We have a lot of it. I didn't quite realize that. And then when you look at the properties, those one in particular, one of course is Curtis Park, which has those kind of homes in large, very large yards. Curtis Park, pretty big setbacks. So that, but yet other mid-century homes were over off Kalamazoo, back in there. Those might be Hazelton, those kind of streets. They're mid-century homes, more compact, maybe not as big of a setback. So it's interesting to see within the same housing type, different neighborhoods set up differently. And then my last one, there was some streets where I just had to call mixed because you'd have a Victorian and a mid-century and every possible thing in between. So it was very helpful in that way. I'm trying to get back to where I think we're headed, where I thought we were headed, which was, do we want to condense some housing districts, maybe for simplicity? And as I think of code, as I did this exercise, I was struck with code that would, as John's talked about a bit, would rely on the look of the block as it exists, the setbacks on that block, maybe the density on the block, the features of the block, or some kind of thing like that made a lot of sense to me because of this variation around town. But yet blocks would be fairly consistent, and I think there's some harmony when the block has consistency. So those are my comments.
I think everybody's covered it. I was also very frustrated, and I heard from some of you. And I didn't know, what I finally did is I was frustrated because like, oh my God, you got downtown, you got, and you've got this much space to write. And finally I decided, all right, I don't know what John really wanted, but what would I find interesting? And so my focus was just looking at the neighborhoods and seeing where they change, and Ted's done a great job of showing exactly that. So that was mine, and I already told John that if he wants to put something together, that my number should not be considered, because I was just desperate to fill in the blanks and be done. Okay, Charlie.
Well, thanks. I just wanted to absorb what everybody else was saying, so I wouldn't repeat it, but it was a great exercise. To me, what this is all about is giving us a foundation for moving forward and trying to decide how to meet our goals of simplifying and streamlining the zoning code. And this underscored how challenging that is going to be, and what the variations that we need to consider as we move forward. Every block is different. I was able to take these and overlay our existing zoning districts in here as well. And what I found was that there are many other smaller micro neighborhoods throughout each one of these zones, each of which has its own character and its own characteristics, its own charm. So from the standpoint of demonstrating that this is got limitless varieties to it, you've proved your point. And now we need to figure out how we can get our arms around all of that and make the zoning code better than it is today. And it's going to be challenging, but it was an interesting exercise, and it was very helpful to go out there and see what really is there. So
That just reminded me one more thing. Many of the properties would not meet the current zoning. For setbacks and, so if those homes were built today, they couldn't be. So, I thought there were several violations on distances between properties and some of the backyard setbacks, and
we're going to make them tear those all down.
Okay, John. So,
Well, I think I didn't want you to do this thinking it was just a fruitless exercise. You needed to get out into the neighborhoods to really see what the context of the neighborhoods are. And what we've talked about is that typical zoning ordinances like Petoskey, and Petoskey's not the only one. Over the years, they've come up with standardized setbacks. And then when you apply those setbacks into your neighborhoods that you looked at, many of the lots are not going to comply with what the regulations are. The other part of it is, I think Doug hit on it, was that in some neighborhoods, one side of the street is zoned R1, one's R2, but when you take a look at the character of the community, there's really no difference. So we're kind of imposing different criteria depending on where the block is at. So what you've experienced in terms of going out and taking a look at your site visits was now that you think you have a better appreciation of the variety of housing that we have and the issue that I don't, and if you want to do standardized regulations, I'll help you do it. But when you're working with an older historic community, there's not going to be one size that fits all. So you've all come up kind of with the same conclusion, is that there's so much variety out there. The variety makes the neighborhoods unique, but it's going to be very hard to codify that in terms of replicating what we see out in real life. But I think it's a good start, because kind of like what Ted did in terms of trying to map out neighborhood character. And what some of you, like Carolyn had mentioned, ideas like, a high percentage of the homes have doors that face the street. Many of the homes have enclosed porches. The idea that you have detached garage, the existence that we do have alleys, which are, people don't build alleys anymore. Alleys were very functional. So we still have alleys that we can work with. The idea that, as some of you have mentioned, depending on the location of the neighborhood, the character for that neighborhood is pretty consistent. Older, smaller houses, 1.5 story, 2 story, some are historic. So the result that I was hoping that we would hear tonight is exactly what you've all articulated. Because I really wanted you to get a feel out in the field for how the land has developed and how the residential neighborhoods have evolved. So that'll help us with our conversations if we want to move away from R1s, R2s, R3s, RMs, and start taking a look at neighborhood character and then kind of crafting what those characters are for these different neighborhoods around the community. So
are you talking about character overlays?
or character zones, kind of like what Commissioner Paul, I mean, his analysis was, I got 4 different neighborhoods. I got a historic, I got a mid-century. You got the neighborhoods over here, like on Madison and Monroe, which were homes that factory workers that worked historically down here on the waterfront. They're smaller, they're closely, there's higher density because they're like on 45, 50-foot lots. So yeah, I mean, we could conceivably come up with different character zones, not overlays, but just different neighborhood characters.
So Ted came up with 4 character zones.
Right.
And we have RM1, R2, and R3, and then RM1 and RM2. So we have 5. So if we did character zones, we'd get it down to 4.
Correct.
Okay.
We also have R3.
What's that?
We have R3.
R1.
1, 2, 3,
And
and then RM1 and RM2.
RM2.
Yeah.
So my sense is very much like what Ted said. But we would almost have checkerboard zoning. There'd be a square up by Curtis Park. It'd be very similar to Charlie just told me where he lived up off Jennings, and from Lindell to Hazelton up in that area is a lot of 1-story, so would you have, I mean, you would, instead of having a zone by geographic, that's what I understand. You're saying we could have Curtis Park and Charlie's neighborhood up by Lockwood, where all the single family or single story houses, there's a lot of them there, be zoned the same, right? Rather than geographic zones that say, if you live in these 5 blocks, you have this.
Yeah, the other thing that you can do, because I think you've all noticed that it's awful hard to figure out what the front yard setbacks are, even though you walk down the street and you can see where they change. The ordinance says it's going to be 25 feet, and some are 15, some are 25, some are 30. So it gets to the idea that instead of having a set number, you could base the frontage, the setbacks on the average of the block, which is easy to do today with GIS. And you can come up with those type of calculations, or like the other thing would be lot coverage. The standard lot coverage is 30%. Well, why? I can never figure out where 30% came from. Why can't you have a lot coverage of 40% if you wanted to have a larger home? So, some of the percentages that communities use, I don't think are really based on data. I think they're kind of a copy and paste from codes, from code to code. And as a result, the codes don't match up with the historical development patterns are in your community.
So, yeah, John, that was one of my questions. Like in terms of setbacks, you've said several times averaging, is easy to do and then I just didn't know how far you would extend that concept of averaging. Would you use that potentially for density?
Good.
Other elements?
Yeah, you could use the averaging for density. You could use the averaging for a variety of things. Setbacks on the side, the rear yard.
Right.
Yeah, it's really starting to play with the numbers and how you would kind of pull that together. So I mean,
So then if you say that, then I'm trying to understand. So, I mean, if I just had one residential district, let's say of the three single family duplex, they're actually
Yeah.
single family. If there was just one of those, that would be pretty doable because you would be doing a lot of averaging for the specific site if someone were gonna, if there was an open lot or someone was gonna take down what was there, I suppose.
yeah, and if there was an open lot, somebody was gonna build a new house, they would be required to submit
Yeah,
a survey.
Yeah.
And the survey then would, basically, they would have to survey the properties on either side and figure out what the average setbacks would be.
so then what would be I'm trying to think of the drawbacks to R1, R2, R3 going away and they're just being residential and a lot of metrics that are
I
averaging
don't,
What
what do you think the drawbacks would be?
unless,
the way we do setbacks now is exactly that.
right,
You
Right.
look at the fronts and you do the averages.
right,
So that already
5 feet, whichever
it
is
is
less.
right.
less. Okay, yeah.
There are a few areas where we don't have anything, like Petoskey Street, there are no properties, so their setback is 25
5
feet.
feet.
Okay.
So there are some areas where
Mhm,
it's a short little section, and if there aren't any neighbors, or it's between two corners,
mhm.
there's not a lot to choose from.
So then we're back to a discussion of, again, I have to look at it more closely. Is there any different uses, R1, R2, R3? Currently that have to talk about. And then the next discussion is how different are they, RM1 and 2? Are those similar enough? To what, do those boundaries make any sense?
Yeah, I think the uses within R1 and R2 are very consistent.
I thought,
It's the dimension required.
Right.
That really is the issue.
In the, excuse me, in the RM1 and RM2 versus the R1, 2, and 3?
You have RM1, RM2.
Yeah, so it's the dimensional. The regulations are just different between
The
R
RMs.
and RM.
RM1 and 2 versus R1, they're gonna have different uses, the RMs for.
Yeah, RMs have a little bit different, a little bit different uses to them.
A little more intense.
Yeah.
But theoretically, to go thinking what your Commissioner Paul is, could you have one single family district? Yes. But then within the regulations, everything that if a new house was being built in any particular area, it would have to be modeled over the development pattern of that neighborhood.
Mhm.
So what would happen is you would end up with a McMansion in a neighborhood that's got
Right,
small houses,
right,
which has confronted a lot of communities
right.
where they've tried to manage that because then they look out of place and it kind of damages the character of the neighborhood.
And that was one of my concerns with increasing density. I think a lot of people were thinking, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we had more housing, we allowed things, but we know we don't have all these open lots. But the reverse concern I had was someone starting to build something exceedingly large that doesn't fit in with the neighborhood. And some of that is happening in some desirable communities
Oh, yeah.
where
Yeah, for sure.
people are tearing stuff down and.
Yeah,
When I correlated my data, I I've got all the data, much like you did, hash marks, and then I put it in a spreadsheet, and I've only got 48 of the houses, so I've done from Bay Street to Lake Street, not including Lake Street, and from Division to Clinton, that little section. There's 48 houses in there. There's only 2 properties that aren't occupied by a house, so the Rose Street house that burned down, and a house on Clinton, the person on Division owns the backyard. So there's not a lot of infill there. The other thing that as I looked at stuff, I wondered how is the zoning gonna work? Because people are gonna do what makes sense to them as far as density. So when I drove down Division next to the courthouse and you see a lot of beautiful large homes, I would have thought those were all R1. Whole street is RM2. Every one of those houses is RM2. And as far as I could tell by walking the neighborhood, there was one house that had more than one mailbox on Division, but most of the rest of them are large, single family homes that are zoned already RM2, so we can do more density there. But a person that owns a house in that location is maybe, you know, the old saying that past behavior is a good prediction of future behavior. Those people that live in those houses don't have an intent to make a larger house and to zone them. So to say, take the rest of that zone and make it RM, I'm being a little bit facetious, but if you went all the way up the hill and made all the houses from Clinton and Williams and all those RM2, because in fact, the house next to them, the lots next to them are, I don't know that we would build any more density because there's not a desire among the people that live there to do that density. So I think as we look at things, we gotta say, will this change actually increase density and increase housing? You know, and where does it make sense? I do really like Commissioner Paul's idea that we have characters, but I don't know how we do it. And do we zone what is, or do we zone what should be? And it's going to be a mix between those. I think we zone what should be in areas where there's opportunity. When you look at Michigan Street and Harvey Street and State Street, there's no opportunity there. There's very little opportunity to increase density because those houses are on top of each other. The other thing I noticed is going up State Street, there were obviously about 3 or 4 multi-family units there, and you could tell they had more mailboxes, but you could also tell about this on their state of repair. They were not as strongly looked after as the single families, and that's what I have a concern about. It was really nice on John's presentation when he had the April 6th meeting, and you did a really nice job of showing where you and Commissioner Wagner or Councilman Wagner live, a beautiful high density place. But go up in the corner of Liberty and Jackson. Not so beautiful. You know, so we have to look at, people are going to be concerned about what's going to move in next to them. One of the most interesting things I saw, because I reviewed all that getting ready for this, the tape, was if we can get there's some grants coming in to have property owners, single family owners, which is great. But if we're going to have high rental, which we do, almost half of our housing in Petoskey is rental, housing units. If there are grants available to help a landlord improve his property so people don't have to live in substandard housing and raise rent. I know there was one of those grants that were one of the things you talked about. Yep.
Okay, Carolyn?
I just wanted to say that, you know, when it comes down to historic neighborhoods and how they look in the neighborhood context, you know, by right, anyone could, you know, tear down a house and put up a modern contemporary house or something of that type. So, you know, we have to be aware of that happening in the future, and also houses age over time, and a lot of those older historic houses on Division Street, they're going to get to the point where, you know, somebody might tear it down in the future and they're going to build something. So we have to, you know, think about the future, not, you know, 5 years from now, but 50 years from now, 60 years from now. So when we do change the ordinance, we want it to be something that a planning commission isn't going to have to be burdened with looking at making changes in the near future. And hopefully this will be an ordinance change that'll be permanent for a while. And the last thing is when I worked at an architecture firm in Palo Alto out in California, they had daylight planes. So if you were in a neighborhood and you live next to a one-story house and you wanted to do a remodel or addition or a new build, you had to be considerate in how you designed your roofs, so you weren't casting a complete shadow over your neighbor's house. And I don't know if you've worked with daylight planes before.
It's usually
In
commercial
residential
areas.
zoning.
I haven't seen it in residential.
Yeah, so I always thought that was neat, and it was definitely a barrier for architects and building designers, because it made it complicated to achieve, certain things that you wanted to on the property, but it also made you more conscious of what you were doing to your neighbors, which I liked.
Yeah, I agree with the concept that we have to be careful of unintended consequences. And as an example, if we were to go up the hill and make everything R3, you'd be encouraging tear downs. And that's not what we want to do. So, but I also agree with the fact that we need to start comparing the existing zones and seeing what is redundant and what is unique and different about each one. But in addition to that, parallel to that, I think we ought to take this idea of character neighborhoods a little bit further. I'm not sure whether it's 4 or whether it's 20, because I came up with a lot more than 4 character neighborhoods, but I was being more specific about the character of individual groups of blocks, okay? But I think that if we're going to move forward in that direction, perhaps we can do 2 things at once, and that is actually look at the existing uses and dimensions of the existing zones, but at the same time, perhaps we can be more formulative in our concept of what the character neighborhoods are.
Yeah, you already have the data from the existing code by district of the uses and the dimensions. So you already have that for comparison purposes. And then we can keep talking about the character zones and if there's a way that we can actually implement that. But
in addition to character zones, there's some practical zones that are necessary. We've got a commercial zone.
Yeah.
Which I'm putting all the commercial zones into one, calling it a commercial zone. And then we have the consideration for transition from commercial to pure residential. And I think we need to keep that in mind also when you're defining character neighborhoods and considering consolidating the existing zones. Because to be perfectly honest, our predecessors didn't do a real good job on transition in a number of the neighborhoods.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, Albert, you talked about a street that had RM1 on one side and RM2 on the other, or you talked about division.
And division was, I think, all RM2.
Well, I'm remembering now, you said on Division Street, there's RM2 across from the county buildings. Well, that's a transition. Yeah, that is transition.
The Division Street from Division to Lake, there are 11 houses on there. All 11 houses are currently zoned RM2. And it just, as a character, what my point was, is RM2 didn't change that neighborhood.
But you have to understand, there was no zoning when the neighborhoods were built.
Exactly.
So it's the reverse. The neighborhoods were built, a zoning overlay was put on. It's extremely clear to most people that it didn't match a lot of the neighborhoods, but it's been left that way for a long time. So now we get this chance to see if we can put it back, deconstruct it and put it back together to make sense.
So that may be a transition neighborhood or it could be, I just looked at that, it could be an R1. It doesn't look any different than. Yeah, I think one of the things that I think you've met, some of you have mentioned it, which has happened in older historic communities, is that for some reason, planners back 30, 40, 50 years ago looked at large historic homes and said, these are not going to be maintained. So we need to zone them for RM1s and RM2s and RM3s so they can get converted into apartments. And then what's happened over the years is those apartments aren't taken care of. And then what's happened is it's kind of eroded the character and the value of the neighborhood. So some of these concepts have like unintended consequences that we have to really be concerned about when we go forward on it. But no, I think you all did a great job. I think
we really needed to have this conversation. You know, I've always wondered if we had a public informational meeting and we invited residents and put out a map, how they would, what boundaries they would come up for their neighborhoods, because everybody has an idea of what their neighborhood is. But I think it's a good step forward starting out. So question I have before we wrap up in 15 minutes, where do we want to go next?
I would propose that we be charged with considering if we were to redivide the city into character neighborhoods, how would we do it? Individually, and then have that discussion.
Okay, so what do you need from me? You need copies of base maps? So you can draw it? What size?
Big.
What? I can get big. I mean,
Was this big?
is that 11 by 17, 24 by 36? What size?
I don't want to.
I mean, go ahead.
I'm not sure directionally character, if we think about. I'm still not clear on our overriding goals of what we're trying to accomplish through this process. It's my understanding that one of the primary things is to simplification and consolidation and achieving simplification through consolidation of the zones. And it sounds like character zones is going in a different direction, potentially could be a different direction than that. And so I just want to, it seems like I'm still a little fuzzy in terms of once we've made these recommendations, do we have a set of goals, criteria that we can lay against to say, all right, we achieved what we're trying to accomplish here?
I agree with that. I think that character zones are creating more barriers, or potentially more barriers, and creating more questions that would need to be answered in a zoning ordinance, where I think we should be looking at, how would we start regulating the zoning the residential districts if we were to combine them as one? Like, what are those lot coverages? What does lot coverage mean? Is it grass? Is it asphalt driveways? Is that included in lot coverage? Is it built structures? Is it overhangs?
Lot coverage in this current code is
Yeah,
structure.
yeah. And
So
like,
it's
how
the
much do we
lot-
want more
lot coverage
green
is-
space in people's yards?
Yeah.
Those are things we should be thinking about, because we have water runoff and it goes into the lake.
Exactly.
So I would like to see it more, how can we come up with rate standards for one residential zone? And what does that mean based on the 5 zones that we have now, or the 5 districts that we have now?
Okay.
I totally agree with that, but I also think that the characters of the neighborhoods are very important, because one of the ultimate goals is to protect the character of the overall town, the overall city. And I don't think we should be ignoring character in that regard and just dealing with lot setbacks and density. I think we need to dig a little deeper than that. And we may not end up with character zones as opposed to zoning districts. We may end up with a consolidated zoning district. I'm just saying that one of my principal goals is to increase and improve the charm of and the character of this town, which I hold very dearly, and to protect that. And so I think we need to go a little bit further than just dimensions.
Okay, Ted?
Well, I was thinking in terms of progression would be starting to have a pointed discussion about the R1, 2, and 3, how different they are, how similar. I know you've got some tables, but really sitting down with that and saying, what's different about them? We have it, having that discussion, seeing if we have any common ground there. For me, I mean, character, what I was thinking, and again, my work was on more housing stock than character of the neighborhoods. For the character, other than the general condition of the houses, the setbacks, front, side, rear, the size of the homes, those for me were a lot of defining character. I wasn't thinking of regulating architectural standards to that degree, like you would in a local historic district. And that seems another step, but an overlay beyond anything we might do initially. I was hoping that, if given the diversity of housing stock within a lot of these R1, R2, R3s, clearly doesn't totally make sense the way it is. If we have more of an averaging approach, we would have a more condensed residential district, but yet if someone tries to do something, it would generally fit in with the character of the neighborhood in terms of, it kind of looks like another house now. We're not specifying materials, color, so much of that kind of stuff.
Right, I agree with Ted and what Charlie was saying, it makes me think of an architectural review committee. Where if someone was gonna build a new house in a neighborhood, then they would have to send the plans and materials to the architectural review committee, and that would be somebody else, it would be us.
I mean, if we wanted to require that.
I was not proposing architectural review.
Right.
Yeah.
For clarity, I was not proposing that. But I just think that we should take into consideration, when you drive around the city, you have a variety of different neighborhoods. And I think that we would be remiss not to take that into consideration in our review. Ultimately, I also would like to simplify the existing zoning code and try and make it as broad-based as possible. But I think we need to consider not just the setbacks and the density, but all of the things that we observed in our drive through the neighborhoods.
I would just, I'm not, so I'm just trying to see if I can understand and exactly what you're talking about. What specifically are some of the things you'd like us to consider? I mean, is it things like
Suppose that there were 4 character neighborhoods in town.
not character neighborhoods? I was looking at housing stock, age of housing stock.
Okay, well, to me, that's the character of the neighborhood in a certain respect anyway, because you have the Mitchell Street Historic District as an example. And there may be other ways to skin this cat.
Right.
There may be multiple historical districts that we can set up that kind of overlay the numbers side of any zoning review that we do. I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that when you drive through Old Emmett, it's different than Mitchell Street. And if we consolidate the two together, we're doing them a disservice.
So if we have a residential overlay or district in our city, but a lot of the ability to modify, build a new structure is regulated by the existing setup of the neighborhood, averaging setbacks, it would seem to fit in many ways. I mean, to further say, I mean, I think it's often maybe common to have front entries face the street. Some people want to talk about roofs. Are you going to allow flat roofs in a turn of the century neighborhood when there aren't any? I suppose you could talk about that. Beyond that, window type, gables,
Yeah. I think it makes the most sense to focus on the zoning that we have now, and look at R1, 2, 3. Look at the uses and say, if we combine them, how, the two extremes, R1 and R3, how is it going to impact those neighborhoods? But I also think that the math of averaging setbacks keeps individual neighborhoods intact, keeps them kind of aligned. And they don't have to be separate districts. If that can be for all the zones. That's the the overview of each zoning. Yeah.
Okay, so for the next meeting, we'll take a look at. Let's take a look at the single family first, R1 or 2 or 3. Let's take a look at the uses. Let's take a look at the dimensions. I don't want you to confuse use versus form. So you could have a zoning district, single family, that has a list of uses. The form can be based on neighborhood context. So it could change depending on the neighborhood, based on the averages. But let's think about looking at the 3 single family and see what the similarities are. And then let's start working from there.
Do you have any more information you think we need, or, I mean, a lot of this we already have.
Well, I can resend to everybody tomorrow. The analysis that we did, we had one page for each district with all their uses and special uses and dimensional requirements. I'll resend that out so you have that,
Okay,
for your homework. And then, that's what we'll talk about at the next meeting.
For your maps, can you include a little bit more of Petoskey, like the Curtis Park neighborhood is not on the maps you gave us.
Oh, yeah,
Arlington, from Arlington all the way to, Levine, you know.
yeah, I gave you the ones that were primarily on the east side of the community.
I just did a slice.
Yeah, I did a slice
I
down.
mean, if you want, okay.
John, since part of this exercise is also considering density, is there a way to visually show like single family versus duplexes or more multifamily? So I could begin to get a sense of maybe where certain neighborhoods are more concentrated than others other than just.
You looking for gross density or you're looking for like what units are single?
Number of mailbox, you know what I mean, like to say that this is not a single family, so I can have an my impression is that there's probably areas of the city where it's more prevalent in terms of greater density and multifamily.
Could be a utility.
I was gonna say, I'll talk to Mike and see if the utility billings have that information on
It's
it.
not consistent.
It's not,
It's only if landlords record it with the utilities. Some landlords pay the utility bill,
so,
so we don't know that
Oh,
they're living in a house. I mean,
the only other thing I know that we have a map that shows all of the non-principal residential exemptions, those are either people that own seasonal or rental properties. I can show you where those are all sprinkled out throughout the city. But I can take a look through the assessment records and see if I can pinpoint properties that have more than one unit on that lot.
And I also think all of us know our neighborhoods pretty well, so we probably know which addresses have more than one unit in a house, so we could also send you that information to help put it together.
Yeah, let me
I
know.
would think.
Just send it over to me. I'll start compiling it. But I think for the next meeting, I think let's take a look at just the single family and see if there's any similarities and have a discussion. Is there an opportunity to consolidate them? And if we consolidate, then what are some of the other techniques that we have to use to make sure that they fit into the respective neighborhoods?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I was also gonna say, everyone can make a list of things that they wouldn't wanna see in these neighborhoods. You know, maybe that's a way to look at it, like, we know we don't wanna see a 4-story building, we know we don't wanna see a flat roofed 3.5-story building. You know, there are certain things that we don't wanna see, we don't wanna see a garage closer to the road, the face of the garage. Yeah, in front of a front door or front porch. There are things we don't want to see happening in our neighborhoods in the future.
And
They do happen.
you're
And they
you're
exist.
starting to define,
Architecture.
you're starting to define the character.
Yeah, yes, true.
And
But then it's also relates back to the neighborhood context, like they would be out of, it would
Starting-
be within the
Right.
neighborhood context.
I mean-
or something like that.
just keep it, I mean, you're doing a great job. Just keep an open mind, because
Yeah,
this is like you could set the stage for the next 40 years here.
yeah. So I unfortunately won't be at the next meeting, but
Oh,
I will. But I will be following in.
Okay. I'm good.
John, could you
Okay.
just, so when you resend us some of these things you've sent before, if you could give a very brief summary of what you just said about what we're thinking of, so we're.
I will. I'll send you,
Yeah.
I'll send you a cover memo.
Right.
that'd be good. So we have a focus. All right, so. Commissioner, public comment, not happening. Commissioner comments. I've invited Doug Buck to be on the sign committee and he accepted. He was concerned because there isn't a protocol for how to appoint people. Over the 15 years I've been there, the chair appointed a person to the thing and there wasn't a vote or anything. We can change that when we do the sign ordinance and spell those things out. To satisfy the planning commission. So Doug is going to be on the sign committee along with Charlie and me.
All right, thank you.
Mhm. Any other commissioner comments? Ted?
Just a question again for John about any educational things you might have set up for the planning commission throughout the end of the year as we try and plan.
I can send you what I get in the way of offerings around the region.
Okay, but you're not planning any group event for it.
I could, if you guys want a training in a specific subject, I can put something together for you. Except for science. I don't like going down. I'm not gonna do science.
That's what I would, yeah. All right, updates? Lisa? Got any updates?
No.
John?
No, I think we're good.
All right, this meeting is adjourned at 7:30.
What is the thing you're talking about
We nailed it.
with the, is it light or?
Daylight.